Midnight pressed against Briar House like something holding its breath. The old residence sat at the western edge of the palace gardens, cut off from the main court by an abandoned cloister, 2 locked iron gates, and a corridor that seemed to grow colder the later the hour ran. Nothing moved there after dark. No servants hurried beneath the arches. No guards traded lazy jokes outside the doors. No musicians practiced in some distant hall. Even the palace bells sounded different by the time they reached Briar House. Muted, hollow, as if the stone itself had learned this wing no longer belonged to the living machinery of the court. Isolde Marrowen sat alone beside a meal she hadn't touched. The broth had gone still under a skin of yellow fat. A heel of dark bread sat hardening beside it, and someone had left a small dish of stewed pears near the candle. Kindness, maybe, or just orders from a kitchen told to make the former royal mate look cared for. She hadn't touched any of it. She wore the same dark house robe she'd worn the night before, and the night before that. It had once been soft. Now the cuffs were creased from being balled in her fists, and a faint line of ash traced the hem from the hours she'd spent sitting too close to the fire. The fire itself had burned down to a low red glow. It wasn't a poor room. Nothing in the royal palace could truly be called poor. Carved oak furniture, bed curtains thick enough to keep out a northern winter, rugs woven in the southern provinces and hauled north at considerable expense. But someone had stripped it of everything that suggested she still mattered. No council ledgers, no sealed correspondence, no maps, no silver writing set bearing the Alpha's crest. Even the bell cord by the hearth had been cut. 3 weeks ago she'd carried keys to nearly every administrative chamber in the palace. Now she couldn't summon a servant without opening her own door and calling into an empty corridor. It was a small indignity. Small enough that complaining about it would make her look spoiled. The palace, she'd come to understand, was very good at small indignities. First they'd taken her chair from the council chamber. Then her name vanished from the evening reports. Then the officials who used to wait outside her study started finding reasons to look at their boots when she passed. And then Severin had stood in front of the assembled court and announced, in the same flat voice he used for taxes and grain reserves and damaged roads, that Lady Isolde Marrowen would no longer act beside the crown. Controlled, final, almost bored. He hadn't looked at her once. She'd taken the silver ring of office off her finger and set it on the council table. The sound it made, a small, soft click against the wood, was quieter than anything else in that room, and yet everyone had heard it. She remembered that click more clearly than she remembered his announcement. 9 years, ended in a sound that barely disturbed the air. The court had expected her to beg. Some had hoped for tears. Others, with the particular hunger of people who find humiliation entertaining, had leaned forward waiting for a scene. She'd given them nothing. Only a look at Severin and 4 words. Then rule without the work you never admitted was mine. He hadn't answered. He'd walked away. But every midnight since, he'd come back. 3 knocks sounded against the door. Isolde didn't move. The first was soft. The second landed exactly 1 breath later. The third, always the quietest of the 3, almost hesitant, came last. Her fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. 9 nights now. For 9 nights the same sound had reached her from the other side of that door. Never 5 minutes early, never a few minutes late. Always the instant the last vibration of the palace bell died into silence. 3 knocks. Then his voice. Isolde. She stared at the door without answering. The candle beside her guttered, bending hard toward the fireplace though nothing in the room stirred to cause it. She'd learned not to answer right away. The first night, she'd had the door open before he even finished knocking, hope moving faster than pride, and she'd hated herself for it ever since. The second night, she'd made him wait long enough that the corridor torch burned low. The third, she'd finally asked what he wanted, and he'd said, to see that you are her, as if she were an item pulled from storage, as if he'd come to confirm she hadn't been misplaced. Tonight she stayed in the chair. The silence stretched. He didn't knock again. Isolde, open the door. His voice, low, precise, trained to carry across a crowded hall without ever rising. The same voice that could stop an argument before a guard drew steel. The same voice she'd once heard softened by sleep, roughened by laughter, cracked open by grief. It reached places in her that anger hadn't managed to burn shut, and that, she thought, was the cruelest part of all of this. He had abandoned her in front of the entire court. Her body still recognized him anyway, in private like a traitor. She stood. The movement pulled at the folds of her robe and sent a dull ache through her lower back. She'd slept badly for weeks, and when she did sleep she dreamed of council tables and sealed doors and Severin's face turned away from hers. She crossed the room slowly. She didn't bother asking who was there. They both knew how absurd that question would sound. Her hand hovered over the lock. 2 guards had been posted in the outer cloister, but neither stood outside her door. Severin had ordered that no one accompany him on these visits. At least that was what he'd told her. She lifted the iron latch. It scraped loud in the quiet. When the door swung open, Severin Veilcrest stood alone in the corridor. No crown. No black mantle clasped with the silver wolf of his house. No ceremonial chain, no sword. He filled the narrow corridor with the same severe stillness he carried into council. Tall, broad through the shoulders, in a dark wool tunic buttoned to the throat, looking less like a ruler come to visit a discarded mate and more like a man who just stepped out of a locked room after burying something inside it. The torch behind him threw a blade of light across his face, catching the sharp line of his cheekbone. The dark hair pushed carelessly back, the faint mark beside his mouth that always deepened when he hadn't slept. His expression gave away nothing. His right hand was bleeding. A strip of linen had been wound around the palm and knuckles, already soaked through in 2 places. Fresh blood gathered along the underside of his hand and slipped from his smallest finger. 1 drop struck the stone floor between them. Isolde looked down at it. Severin followed her gaze as though he'd forgotten the wound was there at all. "What happened to your hand?" she asked. "Did anyone enter this room before me?" No greeting, no apology, no explanation, only the question, flat and immediate. She lifted her eyes to his. "Good evening to you as well." His jaw tightened. "Did anyone enter?" "A servant brought the meal," she said. "What servant?" "I did not ask her ancestry," Isolde said. "What did she look like?" Severin pressed. "Tired." "Isolde." The way he said her name carried the same warning it used to carry in council, when he thought she was deliberately testing the edge of his patience. Once, that tone had amused her. Tonight, it gathered something cold beneath her ribs. She was perhaps 20, she said. Brown hair, gray dress. She brought food, took the morning tray, and left. "Did she speak?" he asked. "She asked whether I wanted another candle." "What did you tell her?" Severin asked. That 1 candle was sufficient for a woman whose future no longer required reading. Something moved through his face. Not guilt, which would have been easier to watch. This was calculation interrupted by pain. It vanished almost as fast as it came. "Anyone else?" he asked. "No," she said. He looked past her, into the room. His attention moved across the untouched table, the bed, the closed wardrobe, the small writing desk beneath the window. He didn't ask permission before stepping over the threshold. She moved aside because the only alternative was to let his shoulder strike hers, and as he passed she caught the scent of cold stone, sealing wax, and beneath it, faintly, blood. There had been a time when his presence in a room made every threat outside it feel smaller. Now he brought the threat in with him. He closed the door. Not gently, not violently, just firmly enough that the latch settled. Isolde stayed near it. Severin crossed to the window. He checked the iron clasp, pulled the curtain aside, and studied the narrow garden below, where the briar branches twisted black and sharp beneath the moonlight. "What are you looking for?" she asked. He didn't answer. He crouched under the writing desk, leaving a faint smear of blood on the wood's edge, and searched beneath the chair, behind the curtains, along the stones around the fireplace. The absurdity of it irritated her more than his silence did. "You removed me from government," she said. "You put me in an isolated house. You dismissed half the servants and changed the locks. If someone has entered, I assume they did it with your permission." He straightened. "Not everything done in this palace is done with my permission." The sentence came out quiet. Too quiet. Her anger paused. Not gone, just stepping aside long enough to let suspicion in. He crossed to the fireplace and drew a folded note from inside his tunic. The paper had been creased over and over, as if someone had carried it pressed tight against their body. No seal remained. One corner was stained dark. "Is that blood?" she asked. He held it above the coals. She stepped toward him. "What is written on it?" He looked at her. Firelight moved across his eyes and turned the gray of them into something darker. "Nothing you need to read. You come to my door at midnight with a bleeding hand, search my room, and now you burn evidence in my fireplace. You no longer have the right to decide what I need to know." His fingers tightened around the note. For one moment she thought he might actually hand it to her. Instead, he dropped it into the coals. Flame caught along one edge and raced through the fibers, curling the sheet inward before a single word could surface. Isolde reached for it without thinking. Severin caught her wrist. The contact stopped them both. His hand closed around her skin with a controlled force, neither gentle nor cruel, and heat moved up through her pulse. Not magic, not fate, just memory. His thumb had rested in that exact place 100 times. During ceremonies, during arguments, under banquet tables when one of them needed to warn the other not to react. The body was treacherous that way. It remembered tenderness long after the mind had gathered enough evidence to convict it. He let go immediately. "Do not touch it." "Why?" she asked. "The ink is treated." "With what?" Isolde pressed. "I do not know." "Then why were you carrying it against your chest?" she asked. A short, humorless breath left him. "Because I did not have the luxury of leaving it where I found it." The paper blackened. The edges collapsed into ash. Whatever had been written there was gone. "You found it where?" Isolde asked. He turned from the fire. She stepped into his path. "Severin." "Tomorrow," he said, "the court will make an announcement." Her irritation sharpened into something harder. "What announcement?" He didn't answer right away, and that hesitation frightened her more than the blood had. Severin didn't hesitate. He refused things, concealed things, redirected or commanded, but he never had to search for words. Tonight he looked like a man weighing which truth would hurt her least, or which lie would serve him best. "When they make the announcement," he said, "you must not react." She stared at him. The room seemed to draw in tight around the sentence. "What announcement?" His gaze held hers. No softness in it, no reassurance. Only the grim concentration of a man trying to set a blade against skin without striking the artery underneath. "My engagement to Lady Callista Thornaby." For several seconds, Isolde heard nothing at all. The fire cracked behind them. Somewhere past the garden wall, a night bird gave one sharp cry, and then the silence came back heavier than before. Her hand dropped slowly to her side. "Your engagement," she repeated. "Yes." The words settled into everything in the room. The untouched food, the severed bell cord, the empty desk, the robe she'd worn 3 nights running because there was no one left whose opinion mattered. She searched his face for some sign that this was strategy, or cruelty, or necessity, or punishment. She found only restraint. "Is it real?" He didn't answer that either. She laughed. A short, ugly, dry little sound. "You walked away from me before the entire court. You took my title, my office, my rooms, every person who still dared speak to me in daylight. And then you started coming here after midnight like a guilty thief." His expression hardened. "Lower your voice." "Why? Is someone listening?" His eyes flicked toward the fireplace. Small. So small she might have missed it if she hadn't spent 9 years learning the grammar of his silences. Her breath slowed. "Is someone listening?" she asked again. He stepped closer. "Tomorrow, when the engagement is announced, you will remain calm. Do not command me. I am trying to keep you alive." There it was. Not an apology. Not an explanation. A threat, wrapped in the shape of protection. The first real edge of fear moved through her. "From whom?" His eyes stayed on hers. "Everyone who will be watching your face." A chill crossed her skin. Of course the court would watch her. They'd watched when she surrendered the ring, watched Callista begin taking the chair beside Severin at diplomatic dinners, watched every silence between them and fed on what it might mean. But Severin wasn't speaking like a man worried about gossip. He spoke like a man who thought a visible reaction would confirm something. "What do they believe I know?" she asked. His expression shifted. "Not much." "Enough." She stepped closer. "What do they think you told me during these visits?" "Nothing." "That was not my question." He glanced at the door. The movement was instinctive and unmistakable. He was counting time. Something in Isolde, the small, humiliating hope that had survived every midnight visit in one form or another, began quietly to rot. Perhaps he didn't come because he missed her. Perhaps he came to measure what she knew. Perhaps every question had been an interrogation dressed up as concern. Who visited? What did they say? Which servants entered? What documents remained? 9 nights of private visits. 9 nights of information, gathered one careful question at a time. "Is Callista part of this?" she asked. "No." The answer came too fast. "Does she know about the announcement?" "Yes." "Does she know you come here?" Silence. That was answer enough. Isolde turned away from him. For several breaths she couldn't trust herself to speak. The old pain didn't split her open, didn't send her to the floor. It moved quietly, and that was worse. Like cold water finding every crack in a wall and widening them, 1 degree at a time. "Leave," she said. He didn't move. "Isolde, you have delivered your warning. You may return to your future bride." His gaze dropped, briefly, to her untouched meal. "You need to eat." She turned back, and the anger came so fast it steadied her. "You do not get to remove me from your life in daylight and supervise my appetite at midnight." His mouth tightened. "Your health is not a political argument. Everything is political to you. That is precisely why you must listen." "No. It is why I stopped listening." He stood there unmoving. The blood had soaked further through the linen at his hand. Another drop struck the rug. She looked at it, then at him, and for one fragile instant nearly asked again what had happened to him. Nearly reached for his hand. Nearly unwrapped the bandage and behaved as though 9 years hadn't been severed in front of the entire court. She hated him for making tenderness feel like a betrayal of herself. He seemed to recognize the moment passing through her, because he pulled the injured hand behind his back. "At midnight tomorrow," he said, "ask me what happened in the orchard." Her anger faltered. "The orchard?" "Yes." "What happened in which orchard?" "The western orchard." She stared at him. The western orchard had run along the old palace wall before winter disease killed half the trees. Almost no one visited it now. But years before, long before councils and seals had hardened every conversation between them, Severin had taken her there after a summer storm. The path had been thick with fallen petals. His boots had been ruined with mud. He'd been nervous, though he denied it for years afterward, and beneath the oldest pear tree he'd asked her to become his mate. No audience, no priest, no political witness, only wet leaves and his hand trembling faintly around hers. It wasn't written in any official record. No servant had been there. No court historian knew it had happened. Only the two of them. "What am I supposed to ask?" she said. His gaze didn't waver. "Ask me what happened in the orchard." "And what will you say?" "If it is me, you will know." The answer sent something colder through her than the blood had. She looked toward the door, then the window, then the fireplace, where the note had finished dissolving into ash. "If it is you?" He stepped toward the door. She caught his sleeve and he stopped. For the first time all night, something like emotion cracked through the discipline of his face. Not love, not openly. Urgency. "Severin, who else would come here wearing your face?" He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back at her. "Do not ask questions in this room after I leave." Her fingers loosened. "Why?" He opened the door. The corridor beyond looked empty. Cold torchlight stretched flat across the stone. He paused at the threshold. "Tomorrow," he said, "whatever you hear, whatever they place beside me, and whatever you believe you see, do not react." Then he walked away. Isolde stood in the doorway and listened to his footsteps recede. Slow, even, controlled, until he disappeared at the far arch. She waited until the sound was gone completely before she closed the door and dropped the lock into place. Then she crossed the room and knelt in front of the fireplace. The note was gone. Only flakes of blackened paper remained among the coals. She took the iron poker and carefully worked through the ash, most of which collapsed at the first touch. One small fragment had survived near the edge of the grate. She lifted it free and laid it on the stone hearth. 3 letters still visible. Not enough to spell a name. Not enough to complete a sentence. Only the tail end of a word. Old, told, hold, household, or cold. She stared at the fragment until the last of the ink blurred in her vision. That was when she noticed something else. A thin gap between 2 stones beside the fireplace, no wider than a finger, with a draft moving through it. The candle bent again, toward the wall this time. Isolde rose slowly and pressed her palm to the stone. Cold air touched her skin from the other side. There was space behind the fireplace. A passage, or a listening channel. Do not ask questions in this room after I leave. She looked toward the door. For the first time since she'd been sent to Briar House, she understood that isolation and privacy were not the same thing at all. She slept badly. By morning, the palace was behaving as though nothing unusual had happened at all. A maid arrived at the usual hour to open the curtains. Another came to clear the untouched meal without comment, brought fresh water for the basin, and laid a new dress across the foot of the bed. Not morning black, pale gray, court gray, the color chosen for women expected to attend important ceremonies without drawing attention to themselves. Isolde looked at it. Who sent this? The maid's eyes dropped to the floor. Lady Arian, my lady. Why? For the announcement. The girl went pale the instant the words left her mouth. What announcement? Isolde asked. I was not told. A lie, and a frightened one at that. The maid gathered the empty tray too quickly, and a spoon slipped and struck the floor. She flinched as though she expected to be struck herself. Did you bring my meal last night? Isolde asked. No, my lady. The girl froze only a second, then bent to retrieve the spoon. Who did? Isolde asked. I do not know. Which servants are assigned to Briar House after sunset? Isolde pressed. I am not permitted to discuss the rotations. Permitted by whom? Isolde asked. The girl stood, her face gone white. I should prepare your hair. Isolde stepped between her and the dressing table. Look at me. The girl did. Fear filled her eyes, not fear of Isolde. Fear of being seen answering. Leave, Isolde said. And when the girl started to protest, now, she fled. By midday, the bells summoned the court to the Hall of Accord. Isolde had not been invited, which didn't stop half the palace from finding reasons to walk past the windows of Briar House that morning. Officials crossed the western garden in formal robes. Ladies moved in pairs, voices lowered, and 2 junior clerks lingered by the fountain whispering until one of them glanced toward her window and both hurried off. The whole palace had the feel of something waiting to happen, and Severin had told her not to react. At the 9th bell, it began. Briar House stood too far from the main hall for her to make out any words, but she heard the response. A rolling burst of applause that crossed the gardens, not joyous but measured. Political applause. The kind that let every person in the room demonstrate agreement while privately doing the arithmetic on what it would cost them. She stood at the window and pictured it. Severin under the high carved ceiling of the Hall of Accord, Callista beside him, the Chancellor presenting the Union as a gesture toward national stability. Blue, maybe, for Callista's dress. Severin's hand around hers, maybe. The court watching his face and finding nothing there. She told herself she didn't care. Her hand had already tightened around the curtain. The applause came again, longer this time. A knock sounded at the outer door below. Not midnight, and Isolde turned at the wrongness of it. Footsteps climbed the stairs. A young servant entered carrying a sealed statement, bowing without quite looking at her. By order of the Royal Council, he said. The formal declaration is to be delivered to all noble residences. He held out the paper. She took it. The wax bore Severin's seal, unbroken. She opened it. The words were elegant, careful, empty. For the continued stability of the northern provinces, His Sovereign Grace, Alpha Severin Veilcrest, formally declares his intention to enter a lawful union with Lady Callista Thornaby, daughter of Chancellor Theron Thornaby. The ceremony will occur following a period of public consultation. She read it twice. No mention of her anywhere in it. No acknowledgement that another bond had once existed. No explanation of when it had ended. The document didn't insult her. It did something cleaner. It erased her. At the bottom sat Severin's signature. She knew every stroke of it. The hard downward line of the first letter, the small hesitation before the final curve. It looked genuine. That should have settled something. Didn't. She folded the paper. Was the Alpha present when this was read? The servant swallowed. Yes, my lady. Did he speak? She asked. Yes. What did he say? Isolde pressed. I was stationed outside the hall. Another lie. And the lies, she noticed, were getting smaller, more frequent, easier to catch. She dismissed him. The rest of the day passed with a cruelty made of nothing but time. She didn't cry. She'd cried once, after the public announcement, alone in a carriage with the curtains drawn, and the sound of it had frightened her badly enough that she never let herself do it again. Instead, she counted. She counted the hours until midnight. She counted the differences between the Severin who'd stood in her room and the signature on that declaration. She counted the questions he'd refused to answer, and the people who'd lied to her since sunrise. At 11, the corridor outside Briar House went completely silent. By past, the fire had settled into embers. At 1:45, she put out every candle but one, set it on the table across from the door, and sat. She wore the dark robe again. The pale court dress lay untouched on the bed. The palace bell began. 1, 2, 3, each note moving through the old residence in a low vibration, and by the final stroke her heartbeat had matched its rhythm. Then silence, and then 3 knocks. Soft. 1 breath later again. Then a third, almost restrained. Exactly as before. She crossed the chamber without hesitating over the lock this time, and opened the door only wide enough to see him. Severin stood in the corridor. Same dark tunic. No guards, no cloak, no crown. His right hand was no longer bandaged. She looked at it. The skin across his knuckles unbroken, no dried blood, no fresh wound, not even the faint swelling that should have lingered. Her pulse slowed. He noticed where she was looking and moved the hand behind his back. "What is it?" he asked. His voice was perfect. The depth, the controlled impatience, the slight roughness that came from hours spent talking in council. Perfect. She tightened her grip on the door. "What happened in the orchard?" His expression didn't change, but he took too long to answer, half a breath, maybe less, small enough that another woman might have mistaken it for a man reaching into memory. Isolde didn't make that mistake. She'd spent years watching Severin answer hostile delegates without needing a report in front of him to recall a border dispute from a decade back. He wouldn't need time to remember the orchard. He gave a faint, weary exhale. "You fell from the eastern wall." The corridor went very still. She looked at his face. The strong line of the jaw, the gray eyes, the faint mark beside his mouth. Every detail was correct. Every detail was wrong. She had never fallen from the eastern wall. She'd slipped once on the western stairs in winter, but that was 2 years after the orchard. In the orchard, Severin had stood under a pear tree with rain dripping out of his hair and taken her hand and asked her to become his mate. So nervous he'd repeated the question twice. No one else knew that. No one should have known there was a question at all. She didn't accuse him, didn't scream, didn't step back. She closed the door. The heavy wood struck the frame. Her hand dropped the iron bar into place. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the man on the other side spoke. Calm. Severin's voice. That was the correct decision. Isolde stopped breathing. She stared at the door. A faint sound followed, not footsteps retreating, but a soft scrape, as though he'd leaned in closer to the wood. And then, with his mouth perhaps inches from hers through the grain of it, he whispered, "Tomorrow night, ask a better question. For a long time afterward she stayed pressed against the door, palm flat on the wood, the iron bar solid in its brackets. Nothing moved in the corridor beyond it. No retreating footsteps, no whisper of fabric, no scrape of leather on stone. He had spoken from inches away and then simply vanished, without a single sound to mark his leaving. Tomorrow night, ask a better question. She repeated it silently. It didn't feel like a threat. A threat would have been simpler. Felt like an instruction. An invitation, maybe. The distinction frightened her more than she wanted to admit, and she stayed by the door until her arm began to ache before finally crossing to check the window. The latch was still fastened. The garden below lay pale and empty, frost silvering the dead hedges, a thin skin of snow untouched between Briar House and the western cloister. No footprints, no waiting guards, no shadow threading through the trees. Only the room reflected back at her in the glass. One candle, one untouched meal, one woman standing alone in a house built to make her disappear quietly. She lifted her hand toward the window. Her reflection lifted its hand with her. For one unreasonable instant she expected it to move differently. Didn't. She let the curtain fall and sat beside the dying fire until dawn, running the visit over and over. His posture, his voice, the way he'd hidden his right hand the moment he noticed her looking at it. The fraction of a breath before he answered the orchard question. The calm with which he'd accepted being shut out. That last detail kept returning. The real Severin did not accept closed doors. He might respect one eventually, might pretend not to care, might withdraw and quietly reorganize the entire palace around it, but he did not stand politely outside a decision he disliked. The man in the corridor had seemed almost pleased, as if she'd passed the first stage of something. By sunrise she'd reached no conclusion, only a rule. She would stop trusting her memories in the order they arrived. Grief distorted sequence. Anger exaggerated detail, and hope was worse than either, because hope turned coincidence into meaning without asking permission first. If she wanted to understand what was happening inside Briar House, she needed something colder than hope. She needed a record. The idea came to her while a maid, a different one, older, broad-shouldered, with red hands roughened from lye soap, cleared the morning tray in silence. "Who assigned you here?" Isolde asked. The woman didn't look up. "Lady Arian, my lady. Were you told to report anything I said?" The spoon paused above the tray. "Only briefly." "No, my lady." Another small lie. Isolde nodded as though satisfied, and the woman carried the tray out. The moment the door shut, Isolde went to the writing desk. The drawers had been searched before she ever arrived at Briar House. She knew because the old palace clerks had been meticulous, and whoever had prepared this desk had not been. Blank sheets sat dropped unevenly in the lower drawer. A bottle of ink stood with its cork barely seated. 2 quills lay split along the shaft. Nothing had been left accidentally. Even neglect, done carelessly enough, could be a kind of design. She opened the lowest drawer, took out a sheet of paper, then stopped. If someone could listen through the fireplace, someone could enter the room. If they could enter, they could search. A record hidden in an obvious drawer wouldn't survive a day. She spent the next hour examining Briar House the way she'd examine an enemy's territory. The bed was too visible. The wardrobe could be opened without disturbing what was inside. The loose stones around the hearth were suspicious precisely because they invited inspection. She checked beneath the rug and found only dust. Pressed the panels of the writing desk and found no hidden compartment. When she lifted the mattress, she found an old button, a dried lavender stem, and a rusted hairpin, blackened with age, bent slightly at the center, one end sharpened to a narrow point. It hadn't belonged to her. A servant might have lost it years ago, or someone might have used it to work a lock. She slid it into her sleeve. A narrow decorative molding ran around the chamber at shoulder height. Painted over so many times the carved pattern beneath had gone soft. Near the corner, one section was slightly darker than the rest. She pressed it, nothing, then pressed again, lower. The wood shifted inward with a faint click, and a panel no wider than her hand opened into a shallow cavity behind the wall. Empty. Recently cleaned. She knew that because the surrounding would carried years of dust, and the inside of the compartment carried none. Someone had known it was there. Someone had already taken whatever it once held. The hidden record would need somewhere no one would think to look. Not a panel, not a mattress, not among the books. Something ordinary, something that belonged to the smaller, diminished life the court had assigned her. Her eyes landed on the sewing basket by the wardrobe, sent over from the servants' hall after her removal, half insult and half afterthought, full of common thread, dull needles, scraps of linen, and a curtain repair no one had finished. She carried it to the desk, lifted out the tangled fabric, and pried up the false wicker base. Nothing hidden underneath, but there could be. Using the sharpened hairpin, she worked several reeds loose from the underside, stopping every time footsteps passed in the corridor, until by midday she'd made a narrow space between the wicker base and the lining. Enough for folded paper. Not enough for a ledger, which was good. A ledger could be found. She tore the embossed corner bearing Severin's crest off a sheet of the cheapest palace stationery she could find, cut it into narrow strips, and began to write. Not feelings. Feelings could be denied. Observations. First midnight visit. She paused. The first night was the hardest to remember clearly, because she'd wanted too much from it at the time. Severin had come 3 days after her removal, and she'd opened the door before he finished his third knock. He'd worn a black formal coat, though court had ended hours earlier, and entered without waiting for her to invite him. His first question had been whether anyone from the Chancellor's office had contacted her. She'd assumed jealousy or paranoia. Now she reconsidered. He'd worn his signet ring, the heavy silver band stamped with the Vale crest seal, and she remembered because he'd turned it over and over with his thumb while standing near the fire. Severin only touched that ring when he was restraining anger. Or fear. She dipped the quill. First night. Signet ring present. Right hand uninjured. Knew the names of the dismissed kitchen staff. Asked whether the Chancellor had sent anyone. Had he known the kitchen names? Yes. He'd called the head cook Mistress Vera by name, and the real Severin knew Vera well enough that she'd once thrown a ladle at him for walking into the kitchens unannounced. Remembered Mistress Vera's name. She added. The second night had felt colder. He'd come in a plain tunic with no seal visible anywhere on him, and when she accused him of hiding out of shame, he'd ignored her and gone straight to the window latch. No ring. She remembered because his hands had been bare when he lifted the curtain. Second night. No signet ring. Checked western window twice. Did not respond when asked whether he had eaten. Left after 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Had she actually counted? Not consciously, but the palace bell had struck the quarter hour just after he left, and she remembered noticing because the visit had felt insultingly brief. The third night, he'd kept his left hand partly hidden behind his back, and when he reached for the door, firelight caught a pale scar along the base of his thumb she'd never seen before. The real Severin had scars. A thin line beneath his jaw, a mark across his right forearm from a hunting accident, a burn on his shoulder from an overturned brazier during a winter riot years ago. Not on his left hand. She'd known his hands too well to have simply forgotten one. At the time she'd assumed it was a fresh injury. Now she wrote, third night. Pale scar visible on left hand beneath thumb, roughly 2 inches. Not explained. Asked whether I still possessed copies of provincial appointment records. That question had irritated her. The records had been taken from her study before she was ever sent to Briar House, and she'd told him his own clerks should know exactly where they'd gone. He'd said, not the official copies. She'd assumed he meant personal notes. What if he'd meant something else entirely? The fourth night, no scar. She remembered checking, though not consciously, her eyes simply falling to his hand while he poured the wine. Unmarked skin. Fourth night, no scar. Wore signet ring. Poured wine with right hand. Knew that I dislike honey in winter wine. Was that proof of anything? No. Servants knew her preferences. Callista might know them. Theron certainly employed people capable of learning them. Personal knowledge stopped being personal the moment it became visible to a court built entirely around observing 2 people. Every preference she and Severin had ever had became information eventually. How she took her tea. which side of the bed he preferred, what music irritated him, which names changed his expression. She wrote the fifth night more carefully, the night he'd brought her the bitter mountain tea from the estates near the northern marshes. Leaves Severin himself disliked the smell of, but which she drank through long council sessions because it kept her awake without making her hands shake. He'd prepared it correctly. No honey, no milk. Steeped exactly long enough to darken without turning bitter. Fifth night. Brought bitter mountain tea, prepared correctly. Knew the cup should be warmed first. Asked whether Lady Callista had contacted me. Her quill stopped there. She'd forgotten that question until now. At the time it had seemed simply cruel, the man who'd abandoned her, asking whether his replacement had reached out to his former mate. She'd thrown the tea in the fire after he left. Now the question wore a different shape entirely. Why would Severin care whether Callista had contacted her? Was he worried Callista might reveal something? Investigating her? Or gathering proof of contact between two women who weren't supposed to trust each other at all? The sixth night had been the orchard. The wrong answer. The clean hand. The voice through the door. That was the correct decision. She wrote it slowly. Sixth night. No bandage. No visible wound. Failed orchard question. Claimed I fell from eastern wall. Accepted closed door without protest. Said the decision was correct. Instructed me to ask a better question. The ink gleamed wet on the page. 6 visits. 6 versions of a man she'd once believed she could pick out of total darkness by the rhythm of his breathing alone. She sat back, stomach tightening. Perhaps she was building a conspiracy out of nothing but errors. A ring could be removed. A scar could be hidden under powder or mist in bad light. A man under enough pressure might genuinely forget a memory that had once felt sacred. Severin had spent years managing provinces and food shortages and legal disputes and the endless vanity of noble houses. Maybe the orchard simply didn't live in his mind the way it lived in hers anymore. That thought hurt in a simpler, quieter way. Maybe there was no imposter at all. Maybe Severin had only forgotten. She lowered her head, and for a moment the investigation disappeared and left only the discarded woman underneath it. The wet pear blossoms in his hair, his hand gripping hers too tight, the absurd seriousness with which he'd asked whether she would stand beside him even if he inherited nothing but a ruined estate and a difficult name. She had laughed. He had looked wounded. Then she'd realized he was genuinely afraid she'd say no, and she'd taken his face in both hands and said yes before he could work up the nerve to ask a third time. That memory had carried her through councils, funerals, scandals, and every night Severin came home from negotiations wearing the exhaustion of an entire realm across his shoulders. If he'd truly forgotten it, then maybe the man at her door really had been Severin. Maybe the stranger was simply what remained of him. She closed her eyes. No. Grief was trying to bargain with the evidence. She opened them again and, on a final strip of paper, wrote, Possible explanations. 1. Severin is visiting under changing conditions and concealing injuries, objects, or information. 2. Severin is testing my memory or my loyalty. 3. Someone is entering Briar House disguised as Severin. 4. More than one person is involved in the visits. The fourth possibility made the room feel colder than the others. More than one person meant coordination, access, planning. It meant the midnight ritual wasn't simply an imposter exploiting the dark. It was a system. She turned the strip over. Question. Why create differences at all? If the deception were meant to be complete, the visitor would have worked harder toward consistency. Unless the differences were accidents. Or unless someone wanted her to notice them. Tomorrow night, ask a better question. He hadn't threatened her into silence. He challenged her to get better at this. The thought disturbed her enough that she nearly burned the pages. She didn't. She waited for the ink to dry, folded each strip into a narrow square, and slid them beneath the false base of the sewing basket, replacing the thread on top and stitching the half-repaired curtain with deliberately clumsy knots so the basket would look recently used. The hidden record became part of her routine after that. Every morning, she reviewed the night before. Every afternoon, she went back over the older visits. Every evening, she chose one detail to test. 7th night. 3 knocks. The visitor arrived wearing Severin's signet ring. Isolde didn't ask about the orchard. What did you break on the first evening we dined alone? The man's eyes narrowed. A glass. Wrong. Severin had broken a chair, leaned back too hard during an argument about provincial tariffs, and snapped one of the legs clean off the frame. They'd laughed until a servant walked in and assumed they were drunk. The visitor's answer was plausible. That made it dangerous. Isolde didn't close the door. She stepped aside instead and let him in, telling herself she needed to see him in the light, though the decision felt reckless even as she made it. He crossed the room without hesitating, carrying himself exactly like Severin. Shoulders level, head tilted slightly when he studied a space, left hand loose at his side, right hand drifting near his belt for a sword that wasn't there. His face was exact. Too exact. She studied his ears, his hairline, the skin beside his jaw, looking for the edge of a mask, a trace of paste, any sign of theatrical alteration. Nothing. He was either Severin or a man who resembled him by nature. "Why are you staring at me?" he asked. "You broke a chair." A small silence. Then, "You are changing the questions." "You told me to." Something almost like approval crossed his face. Good. That word confirmed nothing and somehow made everything worse. He went to the fireplace. He didn't check the listening channel. The real Severin had known it existed, or at least the first visitor had. "Where were you this afternoon?" she asked. "In council." "Council adjourned before sunset," she said. "I remained with the chancellor." "Discussing your engagement?" she asked. His gaze shifted to her. "Among other matters." "What other matters?" He didn't answer. She watched his hands instead. The signet ring sat on the correct finger, but the seal faced inward, toward the palm. Severin always wore it outward. He'd once told her that a ruler who hid his seal was hiding his responsibility. She stepped closer. "You are wearing the ring incorrectly." He looked down, then turned the seal outward. The adjustment was calm, almost amused. "You notice too much." Severin used to consider that useful. Perhaps Severin was wrong. The sentence moved through her slowly. Not I was wrong. Severin was wrong. Third person. The visitor caught it in the same instant she did. His eyes flickered and Isolde stepped back. He smiled. Not Severin's rare, reluctant smile. This one came easy, smooth, practiced. "Careful. You are beginning to look frightened." "I am tired." "You are lying," he said. "So are you," she said. The fire shifted behind him. His face stayed calm. Then 3 bells sounded somewhere in the main palace, and he turned his head sharply. Footsteps in the corridor, more than one set. He crossed the room fast, and she expected him to head for the door. Instead he went to the window, lifted the latch, and let the night air rush in. "What are you doing?" He climbed onto the narrow exterior ledge. They were 2 floors above the frozen garden. "You will fall." He glanced back. Not from the eastern wall. Then he was gone. She rushed to the window in time to see him moving along the ledge toward a stone drain channel, balanced and unhurried, before he dropped from sight at the corner. The corridor door shook under a heavy knock. "Lady Isolde?" A guard. She closed the window. The cold had already found its way into the room, bending the candle flame and stirring the curtains. The knock came again, harder. "Lady Isolde, are you well?" She looked at the hearth, the open window, the last words the man had thrown back at her. Not from the eastern wall. He'd known the orchard answer was false. He'd used it deliberately. She opened the door. 2 guards stood outside, neither of them surprised to find her awake. One looked past her shoulder into the room. "We heard voices," the guard said. "I was speaking aloud." "To whom?" he asked. "Myself." They exchanged a glance, and the older one stepped forward. "We must inspect the room." "On whose authority?" Isolde asked. "Lady Arian's." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one we were given," the guard said. They entered without waiting for permission. One checked beneath the bed. The other went straight to the window. Not the fireplace, not the wardrobe, straight to the window, hand already on the latch. "It was opened," the younger guard said. "The room was warm," Isolde said. "It is winter." I had forgotten. He turned, studying her face with open disbelief. She looked back without blinking, and after a long moment he nodded to his partner and they left. But the older guard paused at the threshold. Lady Isolde. Yes. If you hear knocking after midnight, you are not required to open the door. He added, almost gently, some doors are safer when both sides remain uncertain. Then he was gone. Isolde stood alone, turning the sentence over. Another participant or another warning. She waited until the corridor went quiet, then pulled out the 7th strip of paper. 7th night. Visitor wore signet ring facing inward. Failed chair question. Referred to Severin in 3rd person. Escaped through western window. Guards arrived immediately and inspected window first. Visitor knew eastern wall answer was false. Beneath it, possibility the wrong answers are intentional. The 8th night brought no visitor at all. No knocks, no footsteps. She sat awake until dawn, and the silence unsettled her more than any of the visits had. At breakfast, she learned that 2 provincial clerks had been removed from office overnight, both of them men who'd once worked under her supervision. The official reason was financial misconduct. No hearing had taken place. No evidence had been published. By noon their names had vanished from the administrative register. By evening their rooms stood empty. Isolde wrote their names on a strip and slid it in beneath the others. The palace was changing between midnight and morning, and every absence carried weight now. On the 9th evening, Lady Arian came to Briar House herself. The keeper of the private residences rarely visited anyone in person. She administered keys, rooms, servants, and access schedules entirely through written orders. Her presence here felt, by itself, like an inspection. Arian wore a severe black gown fastened at the throat with a brass key. She was a narrow woman with iron-gray hair and a face built from straight lines. Nothing about her inviting confidence. Her eyes swept the chamber once. Window, fireplace, desk, sewing basket. The glance at the basket lasted no longer than any other, but Isolde noticed it anyway. The western locks are being changed, Arian said. Again, Isolde asked. For your protection. From whom? Isolde asked. That determination is not part of my office. You control every key in this palace, Isolde said. I control the authorized ones. The distinction was deliberate. Isolde folded her hands. Who controls the unauthorized ones? Arian looked at her, and a silence passed between them before she spoke again. You should sleep before midnight. Why? Because waiting encourages imagination. Does imagination open windows? Arian's face didn't move, but her hand tightened, just slightly, around the ring of keys at her waist. You have been hearing things. I have been hearing knocks, Isolde said. Then do not answer them. Severin ordered me to, Isolde said. Did he? Arian asked. The question came out soft, and it landed harder than anything Arian had said before. She turned toward the door. From tonight onward, the corridor will be locked at the western arch after the 11th bell. No servants will enter until morning. So I am confined. You are secured. Those words differ only to the person holding the key. Something close to respect crossed Arian's face at that, brief, unmistakable. Keep your fire low tonight, she said, and left. Isolde waited until the sound of keys faded down the corridor, then crossed to the sewing basket and checked the hidden papers. Undisturbed, or so it seemed. She took them out one by one and compared the folds against memory. The first strip folded inward twice, the second with a small ink mark near the edge, the third with a bent corner. Everything matched. No one had found them, and yet Arian had looked at the basket. Perhaps she suspected. Perhaps she knew. Perhaps she'd put it there herself years ago, for exactly this purpose. Isolde returned the strips and began preparing for midnight. She moved the chair so she could watch both the door and the window at once. She tied a dark cord around the window latch. If it opened from outside, the cord would pull a brass spoon off the table and send it clattering to the floor. She dusted a thin line of fireplace ash across the interior threshold, so anyone entering would leave a clear print. She slid the rusted hairpin into her sleeve, A poor weapon, but that wasn't why she kept it. It reminded her that harmless things became useful the moment no one respected them enough to notice. At 1:45, she pulled out the latest strip and read through 8 nights of differences one more time. First night, signet ring worn. Second, no ring. Third, scar. Fourth, no scar. Fifth, knew my tea. Sixth, failed the orchard. Seventh, wrong answers deliberate. Eighth, no visitor. 2 clerks removed. She held the quill above the empty space at the bottom. The sentence she needed to write felt absurd. Writing it would make it real. Either Severin is testing me, or more than one man has been coming to my door. The words looked calm on the page. Her hand wasn't. A tremor blurred the last line before the ink could dry. She waited it out, then folded the strip and hid it beneath the wicker base. The bell began. 1. The fire shifted. 2. Wind pressed against the window. 3. She checked the cord, still tight. 4. The corridor stayed silent. 5. The ash line, undisturbed. 6. The vibration moved through the floorboards under her feet. 7. Her hand found the hairpin in her sleeve. 8. A faint sound came from inside the wall. Not a voice. A scrape. 9. She turned toward the fireplace. 10. The scrape stopped. 11. The final vibration spread through Briar House. 12. Silence, and then 3 quiet knocks against the door. Soft, then 1 breath later, then a third, almost restrained. She didn't move. Her pulse beat hard against her throat. No voice came. That was new. Every previous visitor had spoken her name first. "Who is there?" she asked. Silence. She rose carefully, bare feet silent on the rug, and 3 more knocks touched the door. Same rhythm, same controlled pressure. She stopped a few feet from the threshold. "Severin, open the door." His voice, perfect again, but with something underneath it now. Strain. Or urgency. Her hand moved toward the iron bar. Before her fingers reached it, the brass spoon behind her hit the floor with a crack that split the whole chamber open. She spun around. The cord tied to the window latch had gone taut. The latch itself was moving, slowly, lifting from the outside. Her breath caught. The man at the door knocked again. 3 quiet blows. And at the same instant, 3 separate knocks tapped against the window glass behind her. Not branches. Not wind. Knuckles. 3 deliberate knocks. One Severin stood outside her door. Another waited beyond the window. Isolde stood between them, unable to see either face, and then both voices spoke at once. Through the door, "Do not open the window." Through the glass, "Do not open the door." For several seconds she stood frozen between the two, listening to 2 versions of the same voice tell her which danger to choose. The warning from the door came low, controlled, Severin's voice stripped of any warmth. The one from the window was quieter, more urgent, the thin pane trembling faintly under the wind between them. She didn't move. The iron bar stayed across the door. The cord at the window had pulled the fallen spoon taut before it rolled free and settled against the floorboards. Beyond the glass, a dark shape crouched on the narrow ledge, moon behind him, his face reduced to shadow. At the door, the other man waited. Neither knocked again. Neither said her name. It was almost as if both of them understood that the next sound might decide which one she believed. Her hand stayed inside her sleeve, fingers closed around the hairpin. Absurdly small, a sliver of rusted metal against 2 men who had crossed locked palace corridors wearing the same face. Still, it gave her something solid to hold. "Answer 1 question," she said. Neither figure spoke. She turned slightly, positioning herself so no entrance fell entirely outside her sight. "What did I say after Severin asked me to become his mate?" The man at the door answered first. "You said yes." "Technically correct." "Useless." The shadow at the window leaned closer to the glass. "You laughed," he said. "Then you asked whether he intended to kneel in the mud until winter." Her pulse shifted. That was true. The orchard had been wet from rain, Severin's knee sinking into the ground and staining his trousers black with soil, and she'd laughed before understanding he was serious. Only the 2 of them had ever been there. unless the memory had been taken from one of them, recorded, repeated, or willingly given away. "Open the window," the man outside said. She thought of the note that had come under her door, the one warning her about a third knock louder than the first. But that note could have come from either side. The entire ritual had become contaminated. Every safeguard could be copied. Every memory could be stolen. Every warning could be designed to make her choose wrong. "Show me your left hand," she said to the door. A pause, then fingers slid beneath the narrow gap near the threshold, palm down, unscarred. The signet ring faced outward, correctly. At the window, the shadow lifted his hand to the glass. A pale scar ran beneath the thumb, the same scar she'd recorded on the third night. One hand looked like Severin's. The other carried the inconsistency. Neither proved anything at all. "Isolde," the man at the window said. "You have less than a minute." "To do what?" she asked. "Decide which of us arrived first," he said. The sentence made the room colder. She looked down. The ash line across the threshold was still unbroken. No one had entered through the door. The cord at the window had only tightened after the first knocks began. The man at the door had arrived first. Unless the one at the window had been waiting since before midnight. "Why does it matter?" she asked. The man at the door answered. "Because one of us was expected." "And the other?" she asked. "Was not," he said. Something scraped inside the wall. The listening channel. A third presence, hearing every word. Isolde understood, finally, that the real question wasn't which Severin to trust. It was whether either of them could speak freely at all. She stepped away from both entrances. "I will open neither." Silence. Then the man at the window exhaled. Approval or relief or disappointment. She couldn't tell which. The shape withdrew from the glass. For a moment only his shoulder remained visible, and then he moved along the ledge and disappeared past the frame. She rushed to the glass but stopped short of the latch, and heard a faint impact below. Not a fall, a controlled landing. Branches shifted in the western garden. A shadow crossed the frost and vanished into the dead hedges. At the door, the other man didn't move. A folded piece of paper slid beneath the threshold, crossing the ash line and disturbing it in a narrow trail, coming to rest near her bare feet. The hand withdrew, and footsteps began moving away down the corridor. Slow, 3 steps, a pause, then several more. He wanted her to hear him leave, which meant the sound itself couldn't be trusted either. She waited until the corridor fell silent, then used the fireplace tongs to lift the message without touching it. No seal. No visible stain, no scent of treated ink. She held it near the flame, nothing happened, and unfolded it carefully. One line written inside. "Never open when the third knock is louder than the first." The same warning she'd already received. Or perhaps this was the first time it had truly arrived, and she'd only imagined receiving it before. Exhaustion eating at the edges of sequence until she couldn't be sure. Had the message come the previous night? Had Severin said it aloud? Had she invented it while building her list? No. She remembered the paper, the fold. Nothing written beneath it before now. Her mind wasn't failing. Someone was repeating information deliberately to make her doubt when she'd first learned it. She brought the message closer to the candle. The handwriting was plain, deliberately anonymous. But along the lower edge, almost hidden in the fold, someone had pressed 2 shallow lines into the paper. Not ink. A fingernail. 2 parallel marks. She recognized the signal at once. During council sessions, Severin used 2 fingers against his wrist to tell her someone nearby was dangerous, without saying a word. The warning might have come from him, or from someone who knew exactly how they used to speak without words at all. She burned the message and watched every corner of it turn to ash. By morning, the western garden showed no footprints. Fresh snow had fallen before dawn and covered the path beneath the window completely. The corridor outside Briar House had also been cleaned. Not swept, washed. The ash line she'd laid across the threshold gone along with any trace the message might have left. Someone had entered the outer corridor before the servants arrived. Someone with access to the new locks. At breakfast, no one mentioned the midnight visitors. That silence told her more than any question could have. The palace wasn't behaving like a household recovering from an intrusion. It was behaving like an institution simply continuing a procedure. 3 hours later, Isolde received an unexpected order to attend the chapel procession. The summons carried the mark of the keeper of ceremonies rather than Severin's private seal, its language formally polite. Lady Isolde Marrowen is requested to join the lesser noble households during the observance of Founder's remembrance. Requested, a decorative word. Declining would read as bitterness toward the engagement. Attending would put her in front of the entire court's curiosity. Either answer could be used against her. She dressed in the court gray, the same pale gown laid across her bed on the morning of the announcement. Fit perfectly. She hadn't been measured for it, and that detail stayed with her while the maid fastened the last hooks. Someone had kept her measurements on file, or ordered the dress before her removal was even finalized. The chapel stood in the Eastern Palace complex, reached through a covered colonnade lined with carved stone wolves. By the time Isolde arrived, the procession had already formed. Noble houses arranged by rank, high ministers near the front, provincial envoys behind them, dismissed officials and politically inconvenient relatives pushed along the outer aisle, visible enough to be watched but too far back to matter. They placed Isolde 3 rows from the rear. Her former position had been beside Severin. No one announced the change. Nothing in the palace needed announcing once everyone already understood where to stand. Whispers moved through the colonnade as people passed. Engagement, stability, unexpected, appropriate, poor woman, lucky escape. Some looked at her with pity, others with satisfaction. A few with the uneasy caution of people who'd once asked her for help and now hoped she wouldn't remember their names. The chapel bells began. Conversation stopped. The procession moved. Severin entered at the far end of the colonnade in full ceremonial black, the silver wolf of veil crest across his chest. His expression composed and distant. A ruler who had made a difficult but necessary political choice and wanted everyone to see him bearing it well. Callista walked beside him in ivory, not bridal white. That would have seemed presumptuous. Ivory suggesting possibility without claiming completion. Across her shoulders lay a narrow silver chain. Isolde recognized it instantly. Her ceremonial chain. 9 years she'd worn it during provincial hearings and winter court openings, each link marking a district she'd helped oversee. It had never been a mating gift. It was an instrument of office. When she was removed, the chain had vanished from her dressing chamber, and no one had told her where. Now it rested against Callista's pale gown. A small silver humiliation, small enough to be defended as protocol. Callista's eyes stayed forward. She didn't touch the chain, her shoulders were too rigid beneath it for that. Isolde felt anger arrive before jealousy did. The chain represented years of work. Night reports, failed harvest calculations, appointments reviewed while Severin slept against the back of a council chair. The court saw jewelry. Isolde saw labor handed to someone who hadn't earned an ounce of it. Severin approached. The colonnade narrowed where it met the chapel doors, and for several seconds he would pass close enough to see her clearly. She braced for the blankness he'd perfected since her removal. He passed the first row, then the second. Callista's sleeve nearly brushed an elderly minister. The chancellor walked behind them both, calm and paternal, accepting bows as though the engagement had strengthened his private claim on the palace. Severin drew level with Isolde. He didn't turn his head, didn't slow, didn't let his eyes move toward her at all. His coldness was so complete that several courtiers glanced between the two of them, eager to see whether it wounded her. It did. The truth of that stayed humiliating no matter what suspicions she'd gathered. Some part of her had still expected a fracture in his control. A glance, a tightened jaw, anything proving the man who came at midnight still lived beneath the ruler who passed her in daylight. Nothing came. Then Severin lifted his right hand as though adjusting the cuff beneath his ceremonial sleeve. 2 fingers touched the inside of his left wrist. Once. Danger. Their old signal. The movement lasted less than a second. No one else reacted. He lowered his hand and kept walking. Isolde's jealousy twisted into something sharper. He knew she was watching. He knew the chain would hurt. He knew the court expected some reaction from her. And while refusing to even look at her, he'd warned her that danger stood nearby. But who? Callista? Theron? The guards? Severin himself? Callista passed next, composed until she drew even with Isolde, and then her eyes moved, not to Isolde's face, but to the chain on her own shoulders. A flicker crossed her expression. Apology or guilt? She kept walking. Chancellor Theron followed, and looked directly at Isolde as he passed. His smile was courteous. Nothing more. "Lady Marrowen," he murmured. "Chancellor," she said. "I am pleased you chose to attend," Theron said. "I was requested," Isolde said. His smile deepened slightly. "Attendance is often another form of choice." Then he moved on. Isolde entered the chapel with the rest. Through the service she watched Severin and Callista from the rear, standing together before the altar, not touching, close enough that the distance itself became a kind of performance. At one point Callista leaned toward him and whispered something. He answered without looking at her. From behind, the exchange looked intimate. The court noticed. Isolde noticed something else. Callista's hand trembled. Not continuously, only when Theron moved closer. When the service ended, Severin left through the eastern vestry rather than the public aisle. Callista stayed behind to accept formal congratulations. One noblewoman embraced her. Another examined the silver chain with open interest. Callista endured both with a fixed smile. Isolde had nearly reached the colonnade when Callista's voice stopped her. "Lady Isolde." Nearby conversations quieted. Isolde turned. Callista stood with 2 attendants and 3 curious noblewomen close enough to hear anything said. Refusing to answer in public would look like wounded pride. "Lady Callista," Isolde said. "I have something belonging to you," Callista said. The silver chain gleamed between them, a calculated sentence. Everyone nearby assuming Callista meant the ceremonial office she now appeared destined to inherit. Isolde kept her face still. "You appear to be wearing it," Isolde said. A noblewoman inhaled softly. Callista's cheeks lost color. Then she recovered. "A book," she said. "From the Western Library." She held up a narrow volume bound in faded green leather. "I was told it had been borrowed under your name." Isolde hadn't visited the Western Library in months. She accepted the book anyway, and Callista's fingers brushed hers, cold. "Thank you," Isolde said. "I thought you might prefer to receive it privately," Callista said. But the schedule changed. The sentence was too carefully delivered. "Schedules seem unusually changeable," Isolde replied. Callista glanced toward the chapel doors, where Theron stood speaking with the keeper of ceremonies, attention apparently elsewhere. Her voice dropped. "May I visit Briar House this afternoon?" The noblewomen pretended not to listen. "Why?" Isolde asked. "To ensure the book was not damaged," Callista said. "A thorough concern," Isolde said. Callista's grip tightened around her gloves. 3 bells after noon. She stepped back before Isolde could answer. The visit began under the pretense of courtesy. At the appointed hour, Callista arrived at Briar House with an attendant carrying a tray of sugared almonds. Arian escorted them personally, which alone made the whole thing feel suspicious. She checked the window latch and studied the fireplace before withdrawing, and Callista's attendant remained outside. The door closed. For several breaths, neither woman spoke. Callista stood near the center of the chamber in a dark blue day dress. Without the ivory fabric and the chain, she looked younger. Not softer. More tired. The green book sat on Isolde's table. "You wanted to inspect the binding," Isolde said. Callista removed her gloves finger by finger. "Why?" Isolde asked. Callista's gaze went to the fireplace, and Isolde watched it happen. Everyone who entered Briar House eventually looked at that wall. "Is it true?" Callista asked. "Is what true?" Isolde said. "That Severin visits you." Isolde studied her. The question could have come from too many motives: jealousy, fear, confirmation, a test. "Would it matter?" "Yes," Callista said. "Because you are engaged to him?" Isolde asked. Callista's gaze hardened. Because people who meet privately in this palace often discover that privacy was an illusion. Isolde moved toward the table. Did your father send you? No, Callista said. Did Severin? Isolde asked. No. Then why are you here? Isolde pressed. Callista looked down at her gloves, and for a moment her composure thinned. I was told you hated me. I barely know you, Isolde said. That has never prevented hatred at court. No, but it usually requires more energy than I currently possess, Isolde said. A small breath escaped Callista, almost a laugh, gone as fast as it came. She walked to the writing desk and touched the edge of the green book. I did not ask for the chain, Callista said. Yet you wore it, Isolde said. I was instructed to. By Severin? Isolde asked. Callista didn't answer, and Isolde's anger sharpened. Your silence is beginning to resemble loyalty. Do not mistake public affection for private loyalty. The sentence landed clean. To whom? Isolde asked. Callista's eyes lifted. That is the dangerous question. Then offer a safer one, Isolde said. There are none, Callista said. Callista crossed to the window and looked down into the western garden, where a gardener trimmed dead branches beneath the wall. Her voice lowered. The court believes Severin has chosen me. Has he? Isolde asked. He has chosen to be seen beside me, Callista said. That was not my question, Isolde said. Callista turned, and for one moment fear was visible in her face. Not romantic fear, political fear. The fear of someone whose body belonged to one room while her choices were being made in another. You think I replaced you, she said. You are wearing my office, Isolde said. I am wearing what they placed on me. You could remove it, Isolde said. Could you? Callista asked. The question struck harder than Callista intended. Both women knew the answer. Isolde had removed her own ring of office. The palace had removed everything else. Callista moved closer. I did not come to ask forgiveness. Good, Isolde said. I came because your name appeared in a draft decree, Callista said. What decree? Isolde asked. I do not know. You saw my name but not the purpose? Isolde pressed. The page was removed before I could read more. Where? Isolde asked. Callista hesitated, and footsteps sounded in the outer corridor. She reached for the green book instantly. The door opened, and Arian entered. Lady Callista, the Chancellor's secretary is waiting at the western arch, Arian said. Callista's face emptied. I was not informed. He says the matter is urgent, Arian said. Everything is urgent when my father wants obedience, Callista said. Arian gave no visible response. Callista picked up her gloves, and before leaving, laid one hand over the green book, thumb pressing firmly along the spine. Faint crack sounded. Then she withdrew. Keep it somewhere dry, she said. The words were ordinary. Her eyes were not. After she left, Isolde waited until the outer corridor fell silent, then examined the book. Provincial Customs of the Lower Vale, a dull administrative volume no one would read by choice. The spine had separated slightly from the pages. She worked the hairpin beneath the leather and eased it open, and something metallic shifted inside. A small brass key slid onto the table. No label, no crest, no indication of what it opened. Only a tiny number scratched near the teeth. 17. Callista hadn't come to return a book. She'd come to transfer access. To what Isolde didn't yet know. The answer arrived the following morning, in the form of a decree posted outside the Hall of Petitions and copied to every provincial administrative office. The language was technical, temporary, and boring enough to escape public notice. Most courtiers would read it once and forget it entirely. By order of the Alpha and upon recommendation of the Chancellor, the appointment and confirmation of regional judges would be administered through the Office of Seals until the current period of governmental transition concluded. Regional judges weren't glamorous. Their appointments took months of petitions, property assessments, and clerical review. But judges controlled local disputes. They validated inheritance claims, interpreted emergency decrees, and decided whether provincial authorities had overstepped their power. control the judges, and a minister didn't need to control every law. He only needed to control how the laws were understood. Isolde stood in front of the posted decree while officials passed behind her, and the phrasing felt familiar. Until the current period of governmental transition concluded. She'd seen that exact construction before, 2 years earlier, when Theron had proposed nearly identical language to transfer emergency grain powers from Severin to a ministerial committee. She'd rejected it then, not because the transfer itself was dangerous, but because the decree named no end point. Temporary power without an expiration was permanent power wearing modest clothing. Severin had agreed with her at the time. He'd crossed out the clause himself, in his own hand. Now his signature sat beneath one exactly like it. She read the decree again. The handwriting looked genuine. The seal was correct. One regional appointment process had moved from the Crown to Theron's office. A minor alteration, explainable a dozen different ways. Perhaps Severin needed the Chancellor's support. Perhaps the arrangement would last only until the engagement calmed hostile factions. Perhaps he simply trusted Theron. Every possibility taken alone was reasonable. Together, they formed a shape she wasn't ready to name yet. A junior clerk lingered nearby, Davian Kress, one of the men who'd once carried judicial reports to her office. He looked exhausted. "Who drafted this?" she asked. His face tightened. "My lady, I am not authorized." "Who drafted it?" Isolde asked again. "The Chancellor's legal secretary." "Who reviewed it?" she asked. "The Royal Correspondence Office." "Did the Alpha read the final version?" Isolde asked. Davian glanced toward the corridor, where 2 of Theron's clerks stood within earshot. "I was not present." "Was Magistrate Lucerne consulted?" Isolde asked. "No," Davian said. "That mattered. Lucerne examined transfers of judicial authority. Severe, pedantic, loyal to process over personality. Leaving him out wasn't an oversight. It was avoidance." Davian lowered his voice. "There were 3 versions." "What changed?" Isolde asked. "I did not see." "Then how do you know there were 3? She pressed. "Because I copied them." He walked away before she could ask anything else. That evening she added another strip to the sewing basket. Regional judges transferred to Theron's office. Temporary clause lacks defined end. Lucerne excluded. 3 versions prepared. Beneath it, question: which version did Severin believe he signed? No answer came. Instead, another inconsistency did. Before dawn 2 mornings later, Isolde woke to voices outside Briar House. Not at the door, in the garden. She rose and approached the window without opening the curtain fully. A narrow carriage waited beyond the western hedges, no royal insignia on its doors, and a hooded figure crossed from the main palace toward the private residences. Evander Veilcrest, Severin's younger half-brother. Evander usually moved through the palace surrounded by laughter, musicians, or clerks bearing unnecessary invitations, cultivating harmlessness the way other men cultivated ambition. People spoke freely around men they considered unserious. At this hour he moved differently. Quickly, without escort, he entered the eastern private wing. Callista's rooms. Isolde waited. 15 minutes later, Evander emerged, his collar unfastened. Callista followed him as far as the lower arch, a dark robe thrown over her nightdress. No attendants anywhere nearby. He turned back. For one brief moment she caught his wrist. The gesture intimate, not theatrical, not political, and he leaned toward her until their foreheads touched. A door opened somewhere above them. They separated instantly. Evander disappeared toward the carriage. Callista went back inside. Isolde stayed behind the curtain a long time. The engagement to Severin was false, or at least incomplete. Callista's private loyalty belonged somewhere else entirely, and that should have relieved her. Instead it widened the conspiracy. Evander controlled royal correspondence. He knew Severin's schedules, knew the palace's private routes. If Callista was serving as Severin's public companion while secretly bound to Evander, both of them had reasons to cooperate with Theron. Love hadn't made them innocent. It had made them vulnerable. That night, the third knock came louder than the first. Isolde didn't open the door. The man outside spoke anyway. Name 3 officials you still trust. She sat by the fire and let the question hang there like it was part of an ordinary conversation. Why? Because the palace is changing, the voice said. Who are you? Name them. Open your hand beneath the door, she said. Silence. Then the visitor laughed softly. Not Severin's laugh, too smooth. Still testing, he said. Still failing, Isolde said. He didn't leave. 3 names, Isolde. She looked at the fireplace. Someone could be listening there too. The whole room had become a collection of ears, and she needed to know what happened to information spoken inside it. So she chose 3 names. Not enemies, not close allies. Men distant enough that their removal wouldn't immediately endanger anyone she cared about, but visible enough to track afterward. Lord Perrin Alcott, a provincial treasurer who'd once publicly criticized her. Master Joran Vale, a records officer who disliked Severin's administrative reforms. And Magistrate Holland Rusk, a minor judicial official known for supporting Theron. The visitor paused. Those are the men you trust? Yes. Another small laugh and footsteps retreating. 2 days later, all 3 men were arrested. The charges arrived separately, each one plausible on its own. Lord Perrin for irregular tax remittances, Master Joran for destroying archive petitions, Magistrate Holland for accepting gifts from litigants. Each man was removed before any formal review took place. The coincidence was impossible. Information from Briar House wasn't just being collected anymore. It was being used. Isolde read the arrest notices at her table. The first thing she felt was triumph. She'd tested the system and gotten confirmation. The second thing was guilt. Even false names could destroy real people. Perrin had a wife. Joran had 2 daughters in the palace school. Holland might genuinely have been corrupt, but she hadn't chosen him because she had evidence. She'd chosen him because his name served her experiment. She had used lives the way Severin used silence. That thought made her sick. At midnight, no one knocked. The absence felt deliberate. The palace already had what it needed from her. The next morning, she began searching Briar House in earnest. Not casually, not as a frightened woman checking shadows, as an administrator taking apart a system. Sound needed a path. If conversations were being heard outside the room, the architecture had to be carrying them somewhere, and the fireplace was the obvious point of origin. Its stones backed onto the unused service passage that once connected Briar House to the laundry chambers. She removed the iron grate, blackening her hands with ash, and pressed each brick in turn. Most were cold and solid. One near the lower left corner gave off a faint hollow sound. She worked at it with the hairpin, scraping mortar for nearly an hour until her fingers cramped and dust caught in her throat. Finally, the brick shifted, revealing a narrow metal-lined channel no wider than 2 fingers, sloping upward through the wall. She brought a candle close. The flame bent toward the opening. Air moved through it, and she pressed her ear to the gap. Nothing at first. Then a distant cough. A footstep. The scrape of a chair somewhere on the other side. The channel connected her chamber to another space. An unused passage, maybe, or a listening room. "Who is there?" she whispered. No answer. Then, very faintly, someone on the other side drew breath. She pulled back, replaced the brick without sealing it, and waited. That night, 3 knocks sounded. The third was softer than the first. Isolde opened the door and Severin stood outside, the real one or the most convincing version yet. His signet ring faced outward, his hands unscarred, a dark coat damp with evening rain over his shoulders. She didn't ask a memory question. She stepped aside. He entered and looked straight at the fireplace. That alone was enough. "You knew," she said. He stopped. "Knew what?" "That this room was monitored." His silence answered before he did. She closed the door. "Did you order it?" "Yes." The word came without hesitation. No defense, no softening. Anger rose in her so fast her vision sharpened. "You ordered my isolation." "Yes," Severin said. "You changed the servants." "Yes." "You restricted the corridor." "Yes," he said again, each answer flatter than the last. "You knew men were listening through my wall." I knew the channel existed, he said. And you left me here. His jaw tightened. I needed them to believe. I do not care what you needed. You should, he said. 3 men were arrested because I spoke their names in this room, Isolde said. His expression changed, that he hadn't expected. Which men? Perrin Alcott, Joran Vale, Holland Rusk, Isolde said. When? He asked. 2 nights ago. Who asked? Severin pressed. A man wearing your face. He looked toward the door, then the window. His composure thinned for the first time. Did you open? No, Isolde said. What exactly did he say? Severin asked. He asked whom I trusted. And you answered? He pressed. I gave false names. He closed his eyes briefly, not relief. Calculation. She stepped closer. Do not stand in my room and look inconvenienced by the consequences of your own design. This was not the intended consequence, Severin said. What was? Isolde asked. He didn't answer. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, and her voice dropped when she finally broke it. Am I your mate or your bait? The question stopped him cold. For several breaths, the only sound in the room came from the fire. He looked at her, and for once there was no court between them, no witnesses, no official language left to hide behind. At present, he said, you are the only person they still believe I do not trust. The answer was so coldly strategic it hurt worse than a denial would have. That was not a choice between the two, Isolde said. No. Then answer properly, she said. I cannot. Will not, she said. Yes. She laughed once, without any humor in it at all. You built this. I contained it, he said. You placed me inside it, Isolde said. To keep you alive. By making me useful to whoever is watching? She asked. He stepped toward her. Listen to me. No, Isolde said. The arrests mean the information moved faster than expected, Severin said. Expected by whom? She asked. Isolde. Do not use my name as though it is an explanation. His restraint broke at the edges. Everything I say in this room becomes dangerous. Then stop coming to this room. The words struck them both. He went still, and for one moment she saw the man underneath the strategy, the one who'd returned every midnight despite publicly walking away. Pain crossed his face and vanished. I cannot, he said. Why? He looked at the fireplace, the hidden channel, the unseen listener, then back at her. Because if I stop coming, they will know the separation is real. The meaning of it shifted the ground beneath her. The visits weren't evidence of secret devotion. They were performance, or counter-performance, a lie built for the people listening to lies. Leave, she said. Isolde. Leave before I give them something true to hear. He stayed another breath, then turned and opened the door. Before stepping into the corridor, he said quietly, Do not speak another name inside this house. Then he was gone. The following week brought 4 new decrees. Each was defensible on its own. Together, they began removing Severin from his own government. The first placed the palace guard under Chancellor Theron during declared emergencies, and the word emergency remained deliberately undefined. The second required all royal correspondence to carry the Chancellor's seal before provincial dispatch. Severin could still write an order, but Theron could delay, alter, or simply never deliver it. The third prohibited Isolde from communicating with provincial leaders while under administrative review, though no formal accusation had been brought against her and no review date existed. The fourth granted Callista authority to chair private court sessions whenever Severin was occupied with affairs of state. Despite not yet being his mate, not yet an appointed minister, and now installed at the head of rooms Isolde had once run through years of work. Courtiers called it practical. A reasonable distribution of responsibility before the royal engagement. The court didn't see a seizure. It saw organization. That was the genius of the whole thing. No door kicked open, no crown stolen, no guard placing a blade at Severin's throat. Power simply moved through ink. Through definitions left out of decrees, through signatures attached to papers few people bothered reading carefully. A throne could survive an assassin. It was less prepared for clerical revision. Isolde spread copies of the decrees across her table and arranged them by date: judicial appointments, emergency command, correspondence, private court authority, communication restrictions, and the pattern emerged slowly. Theron wasn't replacing Severin. Not yet. He was building a government in which Severin's approval remained ceremonially necessary and operationally meaningless. The Alpha would still sit at the head of the table. Other men would decide what reached him, what left him, which judges interpreted his laws, which guards obeyed during a crisis, which woman chaired the rooms where decisions became policy. They weren't trying to remove Severin physically. They were making him irrelevant legally. The realization arrived without drama. No thunder, no broken glass, only Isolde standing over 5 pieces of paper while the evening light drained out of the room. She'd finally caught up to what the audience had already begun to see. The midnight visits weren't the conspiracy. They were smoke from a machine working somewhere else entirely. The palace didn't need Severin dead. It needed him visible, contained, signing, smiling beside Callista while authority drained through the offices around him. She looked at the brass key hidden inside the green book. Number 17. She thought she understood now what it might open. The old correspondence archive had 17 restricted cabinets, and before her removal, Cabinet 17 had held private letters between the crown and provincial leaders. If Callista had given her that key, she wanted Isolde to read something, or wanted her caught reading it. Either possibility led to the same place. Near midnight, Isolde left Briar House through the service passage behind the fireplace. It opened into a narrow stone corridor layered with dust, and someone had left a chair set opposite the listening aperture. A fresh candle stub beside it, wax still soft. The passage ran beneath the western cloister and came out near the unused laundry court. No guards waited there. Either Callista had arranged a gap in the patrol schedule, or someone wanted her to believe she had. She crossed the palace under darkness, not through the grand halls but through storage rooms, abandoned clerks' passages, a narrow gallery behind the old council chamber where portraits stood turned to the wall beneath protective cloth. The correspondence archive sat beneath the northern administrative wing, its outer door carrying no insignia at all, only a numbered brass plate. 17. She inserted the key. It turned without resistance, and the door opened onto cold, dry air. Rows of narrow shelves disappeared into the dark. She lit one candle and closed the door behind her. The correspondence was arranged by province, year, and seal class. Cabinet 17 stood at the far end, its lock already open. Inside lay a stack of letters tied with black thread, each bearing Severin's private seal. She carried them to the reading table. The first instructed a northern governor to support Theron's temporary judicial authority. The second advised a provincial council that the chancellor's office would supervise emergency guard appointments. The third described Callista as Severin's trusted political representative. Every letter strengthened Theron. Every letter appeared to have been written by Severin, the handwriting exact, the pressure, the spacing, even the slight downward slant that crept in whenever he wrote late at night. She read the first letter twice, then the second, and something disturbed her that had nothing to do with the content. A smaller detail. A name. Her name. The letters referred to her removal from court as a necessary response to Lady Isolde Marrowen's improper influence. Marrowen. With a Y. Severin had never spelled it that way. Not once in 9 years. When they'd first met, he'd written her name wrong on a dinner card, and after she corrected him he'd made a ridiculous show of memorizing it, writing Marrowen 6 times along the margin of a trade report just to prove he had it now. Every private note, every official decree, every unsigned message since had carried the correct spelling. The handwriting was perfect. The memory behind it wasn't. She checked the next letter. Marrowen. The next. Marrowen. Every document carried the same tiny mistake, not random but sourced. Whoever had forged these letters had copied the spelling from one incorrect record and reproduced it faithfully, over and over, never questioning it once. She gathered the pages. Behind her, the archive door clicked shut. Soft. Final. Someone had locked it from the outside. Her candle flame bent. The room beyond the shelves stayed dark, and she didn't move. Presence shifted behind her, not outside the door. Inside the archive, someone had been waiting among the shelves the whole time. Then Severin's voice came out of the darkness. Calm. Close. You were not supposed to find those yet. The voice came from beyond the shelves, close enough to be inside the archive, far enough that the dark still hid the body carrying it. Isolde didn't turn immediately. The forged letters stayed under her hands, seals glinting dull red in the candlelight, language controlled, handwriting perfect, memory wrong. Fabric moved softly against wood behind her. A boot touched stone. Severin stepped out from between the shelves. No ceremonial coat, no silver chain, no visible sword, just a dark tunic under a fitted black overcoat, damp along the shoulders from the night air. His hair pushed back carelessly and the hard line beside his mouth deepened with exhaustion. His signet ring faced outward. His hands were unscarred. That proved nothing now. She looked at his face. What happened in the orchard? He stopped. Not because he didn't know. Because he understood exactly why she'd asked. Rain had knocked half the blossoms down, he said. You laughed when my knee sank into the mud. Then you asked whether I intended to remain there until winter. His gaze didn't leave hers. You said yes before I asked a third time. Correct. Every word. The details struck her with the force of intimacy rather than proof, and she hated that her body recognized the answer before her mind allowed it. You could have learned that, she said. Yes. The reply came without offense, and that unsettled her more than a denial would have. He approached the table, his shadow falling across the forged letters and dividing the pages between them. You were not supposed to enter this archive tonight. I had a key, Isolde said. I know. From Callista? She asked. He didn't answer. Isolde placed one hand over the letters. Were you waiting for me? I was waiting to see who used the key, Severin said. And you are disappointed? She asked. I have not decided. The words reopened every wound the correct orchard answer had briefly closed. There he was, the real Severin, the man who could answer the most private question of her life and still make her feel like an object under examination. She gathered the letters into a stack. How long? His eyes dropped to the documents. Several months. How long have these been circulating? She asked. The earliest confirmed copy appeared in a northern governor's office 16 weeks ago, Severin said. Before you removed me, Isolde said. Yes. Before your engagement was announced. Yes, he said. Before Theron acquired judicial appointments. Yes. Each answer came clean, no explanation, no apology, and Isolde's anger sharpened with every one. Why did you allow it? Isolde asked. I did not, Severin said. You signed decrees containing the same language, she said. I signed different versions. The statement landed quietly. She looked down at the letters. Different how? Temporary clauses with fixed expiration dates. Limits on the Chancellor's seal. Review requirements through Lucern's office. None of those appear in the final decrees, Isolde said. I know. You knew your orders were being altered, she asked. I suspected. And you continued signing them? She pressed. I needed the alterations to continue. For a moment the archive seemed to contract around them, rows of shelves rising on either side like silent witnesses. She stared at him. You let them change your laws so you could watch them do it. I let them believe I had not noticed. People lost offices, Isolde said. I know. 3 men were arrested because information left Briar House, she said. I know. My name was destroyed, Isolde said. A pause. I know. That answer hurt worst of all because it carried no defense with it. He had known. Not vaguely, not afterward. While the court whispered, while Callista wore her chain, while Briar House became a cage with monitored walls, Severin had known exactly what the arrangement cost her. And continued anyway. She lifted one of the forged letters. You suspected Theron. Yes, Severin said. On what evidence? She asked. Repeated pressure patterns in 3 seals. Appointment notices reaching provinces before the royal office finished them. Guards receiving orders that did not match my own copies. Then arrest him, Isolde said. I had suspicion. You had altered decrees, she pressed. I had outcomes, not authorship. He controls the Office of Seals, Isolde said. He also controls 37 clerks, 6 legal secretaries, for seal engravers, and every formal courier entering the provincial system. If I moved against him without proof, he would surrender one subordinate and call the rest an error. So you needed him careless, she said. Yes. And you decided I should be removed. Severin didn't answer immediately, and the silence contained the confession before he gave it out loud. The people altering the decrees believed you were the only person in the palace capable of identifying the legal pattern quickly, he said. As long as you remained beside me, they would proceed slowly. So you sent me away, Isolde said. I removed you from formal authority. You removed me from you, she said. It had to appear complete. To whom? She asked. Everyone. Isolde laughed, flat and humorless. You succeeded. His expression changed by a fraction. Not enough to soften him, enough to show that the sentence had landed. He looked away first, which was rare. You believed Theron would expose himself once I was gone, she said. I believed the altered decrees would accelerate, Severin said. They did, Isolde said. Yes. And that was worth it? She asked. He looked back at her. Ask me when this is over. No, she said. The answer came before she'd finished thinking it. Severin went still and she stepped around the table. You do not get to postpone the moral part of this until the political part becomes convenient. This is not about convenience, Severin said. Everything you have done has been about convenience. You needed the conspiracy to move faster, so you removed the person they feared. You needed my anger to look genuine, so you kept me ignorant. You needed them to believe I had lost your trust, so you destroyed my standing before the court, Isolde said. I protected your life, Severin said. Without my consent. His jaw tightened. Consent is difficult to obtain when disclosure creates danger. Then protection without consent becomes control. The sentence entered the archive and stayed there. He didn't answer. She moved closer. You allowed me to believe you had chosen Callista, Isolde said. The engagement is not. You allowed it. Yes, he said. You let her wear my chain. I did not order that, Severin said. You did not stop it. No. You ordered the locks changed, she said. Yes. You knew the room was monitored. Yes, he said quietly. You knew someone was using your face. His silence changed only slightly. It was enough. Her pulse quickened. How many of the midnight visits were yours? His gaze moved to the shelves behind her. 4. The number felt impossible. She'd recorded 9 nights. 4. Yes. Which 4? Isolde asked. The first. The second. The 5th. Last night, Severin said. The 5th. The tea. He'd known exactly how to prepare it, and a meaningless detail became real again. The second had carried no signet ring. The first had. Last night had contained 2 men, Severin at the window or the door. She still didn't know which. The orchard visit was not you, she said. No. The man with the scar? She asked. No. The one who escaped through the window? No, Severin said. He referred to you in the third person, Isolde said. He was careless, Severin said. He was amused, she countered. His expression hardened. That narrows the possibilities. How? Isolde asked. Not every double enjoys the work, Severin said. The word entered slowly. Double. He looked toward the locked archive door, then reached inside his coat and drew out a narrow iron key. He didn't use it yet. His voice dropped instead. The palace maintains ceremonial doubles. She stared at him. What? Men selected for resemblance. Trained to reproduce posture, speech, and public movement, Severin said. That is absurd, Isolde said. It is practical. For what? She asked. Assassination threats. Diplomatic emergencies. Processions where the crown cannot appear vulnerable. She thought of Severin crossing courtyards surrounded by guards, balconies, crowded ceremonies, carriages leaving through multiple gates at once. You have used them publicly, Isolde said. Twice. And privately? She asked. No. The answer came too quickly to comfort her. Until now, she said. I did not authorize a double to enter Briar House, Severin said. But someone did. Yes. Who has access to them? Isolde asked. He was silent one beat too long. 3 people. Name them. Me. The obvious answer. Evander. Not surprising, as director of correspondence and ceremonial affairs. His half-brother controlled schedules, appearances, and palace movement. And Theron. There it was. The Chancellor. The man holding the seals. The man whose daughter walked beside Severin. The man who'd greeted Isolde with polite satisfaction in the chapel colonnade. Only 3 people could summon the doubles. One had been visiting her. The conspiracy was no longer abstract, it had a body. Several bodies. Faces trained to become Severin beneath dim light. She looked at the locked door. Can they imitate your voice perfectly? With training, Severin said. Your handwriting? She asked. Not directly. The forged letters appear exact, Isolde said. The handwriting is likely transferred through guided copying or tracing plates. Your memories? She asked. No. But they know some, she said. Anything spoken near servants, written in correspondence, or observed at court can be collected, Severin said. The orchard was not, Isolde said. No. Yet the visitor knew enough to give a plausible wrong answer, she said. He was not trying to convince you completely, Severin said. Then what was he doing? She asked. Measuring what you remembered. The archive seemed colder for it. She turned toward the shelves. The wrong answers hadn't been mistakes. They'd been instruments, the glass instead of the chair, the eastern wall instead of the orchard, each response designed to test whether grief had damaged her memory, whether isolation had made her suggestible, whether a familiar face could talk her into accepting a false version of her own life. They were testing me, she said. Yes. For what? Isolde asked. To determine how much you know, what details you protect, and whether you can still identify substitution, Severin said. And if I could not? He didn't answer. She turned sharply. What would happen if I could not? They would use you, Severin said. How? She asked. As confirmation. The meaning arrived slowly. A double could visit her. She could speak with him. Later, she might swear that Severin had made promises, issued instructions, confessed to actions. If she failed to identify the substitution, her testimony could authenticate the wrong man, or condemn the real one. They wanted me to believe the double was you, she said. Yes. So that anything he said became yours, Isolde said. Yes. And anything I told him returned to them, she said. Yes. She looked at the letters. The trap was larger than surveillance. They were manufacturing a private history, one conversation at a time. A false Severin planting instructions, a broken former mate repeating them later, the court believing she still loved him and finding her credible for it. Credible enough to be useful. Credible enough later to discredit. Severin started toward the door. We cannot remain here. Isolde didn't move. You began the midnight visits. He stopped. The silence confirmed it. Why? She asked. To determine whether Briar House had been entered, Severin said. You could have sent guards, Isolde said. Guards report through administrative channels. You could have spoken to me before removing me, she said. No. You mean you chose not to? Yes, he said. Why midnight? She asked. Because the western corridor changes watch at the final bell. For 90 seconds, no official guard holds direct sight of your door. So the visits were security checks, Isolde said. At first. The phrase caught her. At first. His face closed. She stepped closer. What did they become? This is not the place. You said that in my chamber. Now you say it in an archive. Perhaps there is no place where truth is convenient for you. He looked at her, and something shifted between them. Political danger still present, but beneath it something older, a question neither wanted to name. Why had he kept returning after confirming she was alive? Why the tea prepared exactly right? Why watch her meals? Why come even after the ritual had been copied? I began the visits to see whether anyone had reached you, he said, voice lower now. And then? She asked. And then they copied the pattern, Severin said. That does not answer me, Isolde said. No. Do you still come because it is useful? She asked. His gaze held hers. Partly. The honesty hurt more than any lie would have. What is the other part? Footsteps sounded beyond the archive door. More than one person. Severin's attention snapped toward the sound, and the moment closed between them. He crossed to the table, gathered the forged letters, and pushed them inside his coat. Isolde caught his wrist. I found them, and now I must prevent someone from finding them with you, Severin said. I am not leaving without copies, Isolde said. You are leaving alive. Do not command me, she said. Then consider it an urgent recommendation. The key entered the lock. Voices approached from the corridor. Severin pinched the candle out between two fingers, and darkness swallowed the archive. She heard the soft hiss of skin against flame and no reaction from him at all. The lock turned. Before opening the door, he leaned close enough that his breath touched her hair. Walk behind me, he whispered. Do not speak. If anyone addresses you, look ashamed. Why? She whispered back. Because guilt is the only reason they will accept for finding you here. The door opened. Cold corridor light cut across the floor. Two archive guards stood outside with Theron's senior clerk between them. A narrow man named Marek, famous for remembering every unauthorized signature he'd ever seen. His eyes moved from Severin to Isolde, then to the open cabinet behind them. My Alpha, he said carefully. We were informed of an intrusion. You were informed correctly, Severin said. Marek's gaze returned to Isolde. Lady Marrowen? Severin stepped partly in front of her. She entered without permission. The words struck fast. Publicly plausible, privately brutal. Marek's expression sharpened with satisfaction. Shall she be detained? Marek asked. No, Severin said. My Alpha, archive violation requires. I said no. The corridor tightened around the command. Marek bowed. Of course. Severin walked past him. Isolde followed, and she let herself look ashamed. Not because he'd told her to, because part of her genuinely was. He had once again protected her by dressing her in guilt. The guards watched them leave. By morning, the entire administrative wing knew Isolde had been found inside a restricted archive with Severin. No official accusation appeared, not yet, but whispers moved faster than decrees ever did. Some said she'd begged him to end the engagement. Others claimed she still influenced him in secret. One rumor described her in tears, clutching his coat while he tried to pull her out of the archive. None of it had happened. That didn't matter. Court didn't require facts. It required a version repeated often enough to become socially useful. Isolde returned to Briar House before dawn and took the hidden strips from the sewing basket, reading through them again. The records weren't enough anymore. Memories could be stolen. Signals could be copied. Scars could be hidden. Even private questions became part of the conspiracy the moment they were spoken aloud. She needed a test that didn't exist until the moment she created it. Something no servant could overhear days in advance. No file could preserve. No double could rehearse. Physical evidence. Immediate. Temporary. Unrepeatable. The next midnight, Severin came to her door, the third knock softer than the first. She only opened it after he'd answered 3 harmless questions incorrectly, on purpose. A new pattern. Proof through agreed failure. He entered. She looked at the signet ring. Give me your hand. His expression shifted. Why? Because I am finished trusting stories, Isolde said. He extended it. She drew the rusted hairpin from her sleeve, and he watched as she turned his palm upward, set the point beneath the signet ring, and scratched a small diagonal line into the silver. The sound was faint, metal against metal. He didn't pull away. What is that? He asked. Tonight's answer, Isolde said. To what question? Whether tomorrow's visitor is you. He looked at the mark. A ring can be exchanged. Then do not remove it, she said. It may be noticed. Good. His eyes lifted to hers. The challenge sat between them. If the mark appears tomorrow, she said, I will know the visitor had access to your body or your ring after tonight. That does not prove identity, Severin said. No. Then what does it prove? He asked. That the test is becoming more expensive to copy, Isolde said. For the first time in days, something close to approval crossed his face. Better, he said. Do not praise me, she said. I was not. You were. Then it was an error, he said. The exchange felt dangerously familiar, and for a moment the palace vanished. The listening walls, the forged letters, Callista's chain, Theron's decrees, all of it gone, leaving only Severin close enough that she could see the tired red lines in his eyes. Then he withdrew his hand. You must stop leaving Briar House, Severin said. I will not, Isolde said. You were seen near the archive. I was seen because you allowed it, she said. I prevented detention, Severin said, by confirming the worst rumor they already believed. His expression hardened. You prefer chains? I prefer being included in decisions concerning my own ruin, Isolde said. You would not have agreed, Severin said. That is not the defense you think it is. He glanced at the fireplace. The listening channel had been packed with cloth, temporarily, but neither of them fully trusted the silence. His voice dropped. 3 nights from now the provincial delegations arrive, Severin said. For what? Isolde asked. A review of administrative stability. Theron's language? She asked. Yes. What does he want? She pressed. I do not know yet. Then find out, Isolde said. I am trying. No. You are arranging the board and calling everyone else a piece, she said. He flinched. Barely. But she saw it. He left before dawn. The following night, the mark beneath his ring matched. The night after, she scratched 2 parallel lines, and the next visitor carried them too. Each evening she changed the mark. A crescent, a shallow cross, 3 short strokes near the inner edge, and each time the system seemed to hold. Not perfectly. Nothing was perfect now. But the marks forced the conspiracy to stay close enough to Severin to copy them, and that proximity might expose someone, or place him in greater danger. The thought should have frightened her. Instead it produced a grim kind of satisfaction. For once, the trap could close in both directions. 2 days later, Isolde followed Callista. The opportunity came after a private court session. Callista left the eastern administrative wing without attendance and cut through the lower gardens beneath a hooded cloak, moving quickly, avoiding the main paths. Isolde watched from a recessed arch. No guards followed. No clerk of Theron's appeared. Callista entered the abandoned conservatory near the southern wall. Once home to rare citrus trees, now half dead after years of neglect, frost coating the interior panes, broken planters lining the walls, dry vines twisting around iron supports like skeletal hands. Isolde waited. Another figure entered from the far side. Evander. He closed the door behind him. Callista crossed the room before he'd fully turned, and struck him. The slap echoed under the glass ceiling. His head snapped sideways. He didn't defend himself. You told him, Callista said, her voice shaking. I told him nothing, Evander said. My father knew where I had been, Callista said. He watches you. He knew the hour, she said. Evander rubbed his cheek. Lower your voice. No, Callista said. Callista. He moved the inquiry forward because of you, she said. I said nothing about Briar House, Evander said. Then how does he know she found the archive? Callista demanded. Isolde stayed behind a cracked glass partition, unseen by either of them. Evander glanced toward the conservatory doors. I do not know, Evander said. You always know, Callista said. That is what everyone believes. It does not make it true. Callista turned away, shoulders trembling. Evander stepped closer, and she didn't stop him. He placed both hands around her arms, and the intimacy between them was unmistakable. Not flirtation. Not conspiracy performed for advantage. Something desperate. Already damaged. "I am trying to keep you out of this," he said. "You placed me inside it," Callista said. The words mirrored Isolde's own accusation against Severin almost exactly. Different lovers, same palace, same arrogant kind of protection. Callista pulled free. "You gave him the schedules." Evander went still. Isolde's attention sharpened. "What schedules?" Callista demanded. "The processional schedules," Evander said. "And the midnight rotations?" she asked. Silence. Callista's face changed. "You did." "I did not know what he intended," Evander said. "You gave my father access to the doubles," Callista said. The conservatory went very quiet. Evander looked down. Confession enough. Callista stepped backward as though he'd struck her. "How many times?" Callista asked. "Callista, how many?" she pressed. "Twice," Evander said. "You said he only wanted to alter public appearances," Callista said. "That is what he told me." "And you believed him?" she asked. "I believed he wanted Severin seen in 2 places during negotiations," Evander said. "You handed him another man's face," Callista said. "I was trying to protect us." "From what?" she asked. "From treason charges." The words cut through Isolde's suspicion. Callista stopped. Evander's voice lowered. "Theron found the letters." "What letters?" Isolde said. Both of them turned. The shock on their faces was immediate. Callista moved first. "You followed me," Callista said. "Yes," Isolde said. Evander stepped between them. "You should not be here." "I receive that advice often," Isolde said. His expression tightened. Isolde looked at Callista. "What letters?" Callista said nothing. Evander answered instead. "Ours." The secret romance, not merely private meetings, written proof. Theron had discovered letters between his daughter and Severin's half-brother. In another court that might have produced gossip. Here it could be framed as succession conspiracy. Evander stood close enough to the crown to become dangerous by implication. Callista stood close enough to Theron to become useful. "My father said he would accuse Evander of organizing a rival court," Callista said. "He had copies of everything." "So you agreed to the engagement," Isolde said. "I agreed to stand beside Severin." "You allowed the court to believe the rest," Isolde said. "Yes. To protect Evander." "Yes," Callista said. "And the chain?" Isolde asked. Pain crossed Callista's face. "I was ordered to wear it." "By Theron?" "Yes." The answer released some of Isolde's anger and replaced it with something more complicated. Callista wasn't innocent. But she wasn't trying to steal a crown either. She was preserving a secret love by participating in someone else's public destruction. That didn't absolve her. It just complicated blame. Isolde turned to Evander. "You gave Theron access to the doubles." "Yes." "Why?" she asked. "He told me he needed to create uncertainty during 2 diplomatic arrivals. I believed he intended to confuse foreign observers," Evander said. "You control ceremonial schedules," Isolde said. "Yes." "You knew which corridors were unguarded." "Yes," Evander said. "You knew when Severin visited Briar House." His silence tightened. Callista looked at him. "You told him that too." "I told him the watch rotations," Evander said. "Why?" Callista asked. "To keep Theron from using the letters." "You traded access to Isolde for our secrecy," Callista said. "I did not know he would send anyone to her room," Evander said. Isolde stepped closer. "But when you learned?" He looked at her. "I was already compromised." There it was, not innocence, not full malice either. The weaker form of betrayal. A man who made one cowardly bargain, then discovered every later choice had already been narrowed by it. "You continued," Isolde said. "Yes," Evander said. Callista looked at him as though seeing him differently for the first time. His face hardened under both women's judgment. "I thought Theron wanted leverage," he said. "I did not know he was altering decrees." "You direct royal correspondence," Isolde said. The changes occurred after dispatch. You did not notice? She asked. I noticed inconsistencies, Evander said. And did nothing, Isolde said. I began keeping copies. Where? She asked. He looked at the conservatory floor. Hidden. Convenient, Isolde said. Necessary, Evander said. Everyone in this palace has renamed cowardice necessity, Isolde said. The sentence struck all three of them. Callista looked away. Evander didn't. What do you want? He asked. The truth, Isolde said. You have part of it, Evander said. I want the rest, she said. You will not get it here, Evander said. Then choose somewhere else, Isolde said. Footsteps sounded outside the conservatory. All three of them froze, and a guard's silhouette moved across the frosted glass, then disappeared. Evander lowered his voice. Theron is preparing an inquiry, Evander said. Into what? Callista asked. You. Isolde's pulse slowed. For entering the archive? For secretly meeting Severin to influence royal decrees. The absurdity of it nearly made her laugh. The midnight visits, the hidden ritual Severin himself had started as a security measure, the very act used to convince the conspiracy he'd stopped trusting her, now about to be presented as proof she still controlled him. The witnesses? She asked. Anonymous palace staff, Evander said. Names? Isolde asked. Sealed. Statements? She pressed. Already collected. Callista's face had gone pale. My father said the inquiry would concern administrative misconduct. It concerns both, Evander said. When? Isolde asked. Within days. The palace had turned the trap yet again. If Isolde denied the visits, witnesses could contradict her. If she admitted them, Theron could argue the public separation had always been false, and that every later decree had been influenced privately. Her innocence could be reframed as deception. Severin's secret protection could be reframed as weakness. The false romance with Callista could be used as proof of instability. Every lie had been built to support another. Isolde left the conservatory alone. By the time she reached Briar House, a formal notice already waited on her table. The inquiry had begun. Magistrate Lucerne Vassal arrived the next morning wearing no ceremonial robe, only a dark legal coat fastened with plain iron clasps. Lucerne distrusted decoration. He believed ornament encouraged exaggeration, and his face wore a permanent look of dissatisfaction, as though the whole world had submitted its paperwork in the wrong order. He didn't bow deeply. Lady Marrowen, Lucerne said. Magistrate, she said. I have been instructed to examine allegations concerning unlawful influence over crown decisions, Lucerne said. By Theron, Isolde said. By the Office of Seals. The distinction is decorative, she said. His eyes sharpened. You have always possessed a talent for making procedure sound personal. And you have always possessed a talent for pretending personal motives do not enter procedure. He sat without invitation, and a clerk set 6 written statements on the table before Lucerne dismissed him and opened the first page. Several witnesses claim the Alpha visited Briar House after midnight, Lucerne said. He did, Isolde said. The direct answer surprised him. How often? I do not know. You kept no record? Lucerne asked. Her eyes went to the sewing basket. I kept one. He followed her gaze. She didn't retrieve it. Why? Lucerne asked. Because some of the visitors were not Severin, Isolde said. His expression stayed flat. Explain. She did. Not everything enough. The knocks. The wrong memories. The changing scars. The hidden sound channel. The ceremonial doubles. Lucerne listened without a single interruption, and when she finished he adjusted the stack of statements in front of him. You understand how this sounds? Lucerne said. Yes, Isolde said. Convenient. Yes. Difficult to prove, Lucerne said. Yes. Then why tell me? He asked. Because you dislike me enough to examine the evidence, Isolde said. For the first time his expression shifted, almost amusement. Your influence over the Alpha was excessive. My influence was visible. Theron's is concealed, Isolde said. Both may be dangerous, Lucerne said. Agreed. The answer unsettled him. He read the first witness statement aloud. Lady Marrowen continued to exercise improper personal influence over royal judgment through clandestine meetings conducted after the midnight bell. He opened the second. The former royal mate maintained improper personal influence over decisions of the crown through clandestine meetings occurring after midnight. The third. Lady Marrowen's clandestine midnight meetings allowed continued improper influence upon royal judgment. He stopped. The language wasn't identical, but the structure was improper influence, clandestine meetings, royal judgment. The same sequence repeated in testimony that was supposedly independent. Lucerne laid the pages side by side and studied them. Were these witnesses questioned together? No, Isolde said. Did the same clerk record all statements? Lucerne asked. No. Then someone supplied the vocabulary, he said. Yes. The admission came reluctantly, a crack, small but important. Lucerne examined the paper edges. 3 inks, he murmured. 2 scribes. 1 phrase source. You believe me? Isolde asked. I believe the statements were coordinated, Lucerne said. That was not my question, she said. I do not answer broader questions before narrower ones are resolved. There he was, infuriating and at the same time useful. He gathered the pages, and before leaving he paused beside the fireplace and noticed the replaced brick. What is behind that? Lucerne asked. A passage for sound, Isolde said. Who knew? He asked. Severin. His expression hardened. And he left you here? Yes, Isolde said. He looked at her, and for one moment his dislike of Isolde collided with a deeper dislike of concealed procedure. The procedure won. I will return. He didn't say when. That afternoon, Severin issued the confinement order. 8 guards arrived with the notice, not 2, 8, and Briar House was placed under formal investigation restrictions. No visitors without written legal approval, no correspondence, no movement beyond the Western Garden. His seal sat at the bottom of the notice, genuine or forged, and by that point it no longer mattered emotionally either way. To the court he had chosen. Again. Isolde stood at the top of the stair while the guards took their positions. The captain bowed. My lady, by order of the Alpha. I can read. He avoided her eyes. The outer gates closed, iron settling into stone with a heavy, final sound. Near sunset, Severin came through the corridor publicly, with guards, and did not ask to enter. He stood at the threshold and read the confinement terms aloud so every witness present could hear his authority, and Isolde looked at him without expression the whole time. When he finished, he dismissed everyone but the captain, then stepped close enough that only she could hear. Do not trust the guards I send, Severin said. She nearly laughed. You sent them? Yes. Then perhaps begin sending fewer things I cannot trust, Isolde said. His gaze held hers. 3 days. What happens in 3 days? She asked. He didn't answer. The captain shifted nearby, and Severin stepped back, letting the public coldness settle over him again. Lady Marrowen will remain inside Briar House until the inquiry concludes. He turned and left,